The rain was relentless, pounding the windshield of my beat-up Honda like it had a personal vendetta. I was 25, broke, and driving through Oregon's backroads to a cabin I'd never seen, invited by a coworker I barely knew. By the time I pulled up to the gravel path, my heart was racing not from the storm, but from the gnawing feeling I was about to walk into something I couldn't escape. My name's Ethan Carter, and I'm not the guy who says yes to random weekend getaways. I'm the one who stays late at the office, crunching numbers for a Portland accounting firm, hiding behind spreadsheets because they're safer than people. But when Jake, the new guy with a grin that could sell ice to penguins, mentioned his family's cabin in the woods, I said yes. Maybe it was his charm, or maybe I was just tired of my own loneliness. Either way, I was here, staring at a rustic cabin through the blur of rain, questioning every life choice that led to this moment. The cabin was smaller than I'd imagined, tucked between towering pines like it was hiding from the world. Its wooden exterior was weathered but sturdy, with a faint glow spilling from the windows. I grabbed my backpack, braced myself against the downpour, and sprinted to the porch. My knock echoed, too loud in the quiet. No answer. I knocked again, harder, my stomach twisting. Then the door creaked open, and it wasn't Jake standing there. It was a man, maybe 50, with broad shoulders and a face carved by time salt and pepper hair, deep-set eyes that held a storm of their own. He wore a faded flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up, and his presence filled the doorway like he was part of the cabin itself. "You must be Ethan," he said, his voice low and steady, like gravel underfoot. "I'm Tom, Jake's father. Come in." I hesitated. Jake hadn't mentioned his dad. Hell, Jake hadn't mentioned much at all, just a vague promise of a chill weekend with a few others from work. But there was no one else here, just this man and the weight of his gaze. I stepped inside, dripping wet, and the door closed behind me with a thud that felt final. The cabin smelled of cedar and coffee, warm against the chill of my soaked clothes. Tom gestured to a couch by a crackling fireplace. "Jake's running late," he said, handing me a towel. "Got caught up in the city. It's just us for now." His eyes lingered on me, not in a creepy way, but like he was trying to figure out why I was here. I wondered the same thing. I sat, clutching the towel, and tried to make sense of the situation. Jake was my age, maybe a year older, all easy laughs and casual confidence. We'd bonded over late-night coffee runs at work. But I didn't know him. Not really. And now I was alone in his family's cabin with his dad, who looked like he could chop down a tree with his bare hands but had a softness in his eyes that threw me off. "You don't talk much, do you?" Tom said, leaning against the kitchen counter, a mug of coffee in his hand. His tone wasn't accusatory, just curious. "I'm not great with strangers," I admitted, my voice barely above the crackle of the fire. "Jake said there'd be others." Tom nodded, like he'd heard this before. "Jake says a lot of things. He's got a big heart, but his plans don't always land." He paused, studying me. "You're not what I expected." I bristled. "What's that supposed to mean?" He chuckled. A low rumble. "Just that Jake's friends are usually louder. You look like you're carrying something heavy." I didn't know how to respond to that. He wasn't wrong, but I wasn't about to spill my guts to a stranger. Growing up gay in a small Midwest town had taught me to keep my walls high. I'd moved to Portland to start over, to be free. But freedom was harder than it looked. I was still figuring out who I was when no one was watching. Tom didn't push. Instead, he handed me a mug of coffee, his fingers brushing mine for a split second. The contact sent a jolt through me, unexpected and unnerving. "You're soaked," he said. "I'll grab you some dry clothes." As he disappeared down a hallway, I stared into the fire, my mind racing. This wasn't what I'd signed up for. I come expecting a weekend of awkward small talk with coworkers. Maybe a few beers by a lake. Not this alone with a man who seemed to see right through me. In a cabin that felt like it held secrets older than both of us. When Tom returned, he handed me a stack of Clothisa soft plaid shirt and sweatpants that smelled faintly of pine. "Bathrooms down the hall," he said. "Get comfortable. Jake'll be here soon." I changed quickly. The dry clothes a relief against my clammy skin. The shirt was too big. Clearly Tom's. And I caught myself inhaling the scent of it. Like some lovesick teenager. "Get a grip, Ethan," I thought. "He's Jake's dad. For God's sake." Back in the living room, Tom was stoking the fire. He glanced up as I sat down, and something in his expression shifted, softened. "Maybe better?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Thanks." We sat in silence for a moment, the fire snapping between us. Then he spoke, his voice quiet but deliberate. "You ever feel like you're running from something, Ethan?" The question hit like a punch. I wanted to deflect, to laugh it off. But his eyes held mine, steady and unflinching. I swallowed hard. "All the time." He nodded, like he'd known the answer before I said it. "Me too," he said. And the weight of those two words hung in the air, heavy with a story I didn't yet understand. That night, as the rain battered the cabin, I couldn't shake the feeling that this weekend was about to change everything. Jake still hadn't shown up, and Tom's presence was a quiet storm, pulling me in ways I wasn't ready for. I didn't know it yet, but the man across from me was about to unravel every wall I'd built and show me what it meant to be truly seen. The cabin was too quiet without the rain, the silence amplifying every creak of the floorboards. I woke up on the couch, Tom's plaid shirt still draped over me like a shield. Last night's conversation lingered in my mind, his question about running. My half-honest answer. The way his eyes seemed to see past my defenses. Morning light filtered through the cabin's windows, painting the room in soft golds. I sat up, rubbing sleep from my eyes, and noticed Tom in the kitchen, flipping pancakes with a focus that felt almost meditative. He didn't look like Jake. Not really. Where Jake was all boyish charm, Tom was weathered strength. Like the pines outside, rooted, enduring. "Morning," he said without turning, his voice warm but guarded. "Hope you're hungry." I mumbled a thanks and joined him at the small wooden table, my stomach growling despite the knot of nerves. The pancakes were perfect, golden and fluffy, and for a moment, I let myself pretend this was normal, just two guys sharing breakfast. No stakes, no questions. But normal wasn't my thing. And Tom wasn't just some guy. "Jake called," Tom said, setting a plate in front of me. "He's stuck in Portland. Car trouble. Or so he says." His tone carried a hint of skepticism. Like he knew Jake's excuses better than anyone. "So it's just us?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "For now." He sat across from me, his gaze steady. "You okay with that?" I nodded, though my heart said otherwise. Being alone with Tom felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, thrilling, terrifying, and way too close to falling. I focused on my pancakes, cutting them into precise bites to avoid his eyes. We ate in silence at first, the kind that wasn't awkward but heavy, like we were both holding back. Then Tom spoke, his voice low. "You didn't come here for pancakes, did you?" I froze, fork halfway to my mouth. "What?" "You're here because Jake invited you, but there's something else. I can see it." He leaned back, arms crossed, not accusing but searching. "You don't strike me as the type who does things on a whim." I wanted to laugh it off, to say he was reading too much into it. But he wasn't wrong. I'd said yes to Jake because I was desperate for something: connection, escape, anything to fill the hollow space I'd carried since leaving Ohio. Back there, being gay meant whispers and judgment, a life spent hiding. Portland was supposed to be different, but I was still hiding, just in fancier coffee shops. "I don't know why I'm here," I admitted, setting my fork down. "Jake's easy to say yes to." Tom's lips twitched. Not quite a smile. "He's got that gift. Always has." He paused, then added, "But you're not here for him, are you?" The question hung between us, sharp and dangerous. Could have lied, brushed it off. But something about Tom made lying feel impossible. "Maybe I'm just tired of being alone," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. His eyes softened, and for a moment, I saw something raw in them: grief, maybe, or regret. "Loneliness is a hell of a thing," he said. "Makes you do crazy stuff, like inviting strangers to cabins." I laughed, a small, nervous sound, or saying yes to them. He smiled then, a real one, and it hit me harder than it should have. Tom wasn't just Jake's dad. He was a man who'd lived, loved, lost someone who carried his own weight. And I was drawn to it, to him, in a way that scared me senseless. We spent the morning cleaning up, an unspoken agreement to keep busy. Tom showed me how to chop firewood, his hands steady on the axe as he demonstrated. I tried to focus on the task, not the way his muscles flexed under his shirt or the quiet way he corrected my grip. His touch firm but gentle. Every moment with him felt like a test I wasn't sure I was passing. By afternoon, Jake still hadn't shown, and the cabin felt smaller, the air thicker. We hiked to a nearby lake, the path winding through pines that whispered with every breeze. Tom talked about the land, how his family had owned the cabin for decades, how it was his refuge after his divorce. He didn't mention Jake's mom, and I didn't ask. But the weight of her absence was there, in the lines around his eyes. At the lake, we sat on a fallen log, the water still and glassy. "You ever been in love, Ethan?" he asked, out of nowhere. My throat tightened. "Once. High school. Didn't end well." I didn't elaborate, and he didn't push. But the memory stung: first love, first heartbreak, first time I learned to hide. "I loved once too," he said, staring at the lake. Thought it'd last forever. Didn't. His voice was steady, but there was a crack in it. A glimpse of something he wasn't ready to share. We sat there, the silence stretching, and I realized I didn't want to leave. Not the lake. Not the cabin. Not him. It was ridiculous. I barely knew him, but Tom felt like the first real thing I'd found in years. And that terrified me more than anything. As we hiked back, the sun dipping low, I caught him watching me, his expression unreadable. What? I asked, my voice sharper than I meant. Nothing, he said, but his eyes said otherwise. Just glad you're here. My heart stuttered. I wanted to ask what he meant, to demand answers, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I followed him back to the cabin, the weight of his words settling into me like a stone. Jake wasn't here, but Tom was, and I wasn't sure what that meant or what I wanted it to mean. The cabin's warmth was a stark contrast to the evening chill as we returned from the lake. Tom lit another fire, the flames casting shadows that danced across his face, highlighting the lines of a life I was starting to want to understand. I sat on the couch, my hands wrapped around a mug of tea, trying to ignore the pull I felt toward him, a pull that was equal parts reckless and undeniable. You're quiet again, Tom said, settling into an armchair across from me. His tone was light, but his eyes were searching, like he could sense the storm in my head. Just thinking, I said, staring into my tea. This isn't what I expected. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. What did you expect? I laughed, a bitter edge to it. I don't know. Beer. Bad karaoke. Jake's loud friends. Not this. I gestured vaguely, meaning the cabin, the silence, him. Tom's mouth quirked. Disappointed. No, I said, too quickly. It's just intense. He nodded, like he understood exactly what I meant. This place does that. Strips things down. Makes you face what's real. I wanted to ask what was real for him, but my phone buzzed, shattering the moment. It was Jake. Finally. Hey, man. So sorry. His text read. Car's fixed, but I'm stuck in traffic. Be there by morning. You good with Dad? I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the reply. Was I good? I wasn't sure what I was. I typed a quick, yeah. All good, and set the phone down, feeling Tom's eyes on me. Jake? He asked. Yeah. Says he'll be here tomorrow. Tom's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Disappointment. Maybe. Or relief. He's always late, he said, but there was no malice in it. Just a tired kind of love. We lapsed into silence again, the fire's crackle filling the space. I wanted to say something, anything, to bridge the gap between us, but every word felt like a risk. Instead, I asked, how long have you been coming here? Since I was a kid, Tom said, his voice softening. My dad built this place. Used to bring me and my brothers up here to fish, hunt, get away from the world. After he passed, it became mine. Jake grew up here too, but he doesn't love it the way I do. Why not? I asked, genuinely curious. Tom shrugged. Jake's a city kid, always chasing something. Friends, parties, the next big thing. This place is too quiet for him. But not for you, I said. More statement than question. He looked at me then. Really looked. And I felt my breath catch. No, he said. Not for me. The air felt charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. I wanted to ask about his life, his past, the love he'd mentioned at the lake. But I didn't know how to start. Instead, I said, "It's peaceful here. I get why you stay." He smiled. A small, sad thing. It's not just peace. It's truth. Out here, you can't hide from yourself. I swallowed hard, his words cutting too close. I'd spent years hiding from my family, my hometown, even from myself. Portland was supposed to be my fresh start, but I was still running, still afraid of what it meant to be me. And here was Tom, seeing it all without me saying a word. "Tell me about you," he said suddenly, leaning back in his chair. "Not the work version. The real Ethan." I froze. No one had ever asked me that. Not like this. "There's not much to tell," I said, deflecting. "Grew up in Ohio. Moved to Portland. Work too much. That's about it." He raised an eyebrow. "That's not it. You've got a story. I can see it in your eyes." My chest tightened. I wanted to tell him about the kid who hit his first crush. About the nights spent crying in a dorm room. About the fear that I'd never be enough. But I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I said, "What about you? What's your story?" He hesitated, then leaned forward, his voice low. "I was married for 20 years. Loved her. Or thought I did. We had Jake. Built a life. But I was lying to myself. To her. About who I was." He paused, his eyes distant. "I'm gay. Ethan. Came out 5 years ago. Lost a lot friends. Family. The life I knew. But I gained something too. Truth." The word hung between us, heavy and raw. I stared at him, my heart pounding. He was gay. Jake's dad. This man who felt like a force of nature was gay. And he was looking at me like he saw the same truth in me. "I didn't know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Not many do," he said. "Jake knows. He's been great. Better than I deserve. But it's not something I advertise." I nodded, my mind racing. I wanted to tell him I was gay too, that I understood the weight of hiding, the cost of truth. But the words stuck in my throat, choked by years of fear. Instead, I said, "I'm glad you're here." He smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Me too, Ethan. Me too." That night, as I lay on the couch, the fire dying to embers, I couldn't stop thinking about Tom. His story, his strength, the way he made me feel seen. I didn't know what was happening between us, but I knew one thing. I wasn't ready to leave this cabin. Not yet. Morning broke with a quiet that felt sacred. The kind that made you want to hold your breath. I woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Tom moving in the kitchen. His steps deliberate but soft. Last night's confession. His confession still echoed in my head. A seismic shift I hadn't seen coming. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, and caught him watching me from the kitchen. "Sleep okay?" he asked, his voice carrying a warmth that made my chest ache. Yeah, I lied. I'd barely slept. My mind tangled in thoughts of him, of what it meant to sit across from someone who'd lived the truth I was still too scared to claim. He handed me a mug, his fingers brushing mine again, and I wondered if he felt the same spark I did. "Jake should be here soon," he said, but there was a question in his tone, like he was testing me. I nodded, sipping the coffee to avoid his gaze. The idea of Jake arriving felt like an intrusion, a reminder that this wasn't my world. But Tom's world, his quiet strength. His honesty was pulling me in, and I didn't know how to stop it. We spent the morning outside, clearing brush from the cabin's perimeter. Tom worked with a rhythm that was almost hypnotic, his movements sure and practiced. I tried to keep up, my hands clumsy with the rake. But he didn't judge. Instead, he'd pause to show me how to hold it, his hands guiding mine with a patience that felt intimate. "You're not bad at this," he said, a teasing edge to his voice. "I'm terrible," I shot back, grinning despite myself. "You're just being nice." He laughed, a sound that warmed the air. "Maybe, but you're trying. That's more than most." We worked until the sun was high, sweat beading on my forehead despite the cool air. When we stopped for water, Tom leaned against a tree, his eyes catching mine. "You ever think about what you want, Ethan? Not what you're supposed to want, but what you really want?" The question hit like a freight train. I wanted to say I didn't know, but that wasn't true. I wanted to be free, to love without fear, to be the person I'd buried under years of shame. And right now, I wanted him, Tom, with his steady hands and his storm-filled eyes. "I want to stop running," I said finally, my voice raw. "I want to be me." He nodded, like he'd expected that answer. "That's the hardest part," he said. "But it's worth it." Before I could respond, the crunch of tires on gravel broke the moment. Jake's truck pulled up, and he hopped out, all grins and apologies. "Ethan, man, I'm so sorry," he called, jogging toward us. Traffic was a nightmare. I forced a smile, but my heart sank. Jake's arrival meant the end of this bubble, this fragile thing between me and Tom. I glanced at Tom, but his face was unreadable, a mask of calm I couldn't penetrate. Jake hugged his dad, then turned to me, oblivious to the tension. "You surviving the old man?" he asked, clapping me on the shoulder. "Barely," I said, managing a laugh. But my eyes found Tom's, and for a split second, I saw something: regret, maybe, or longing. The rest of the day was a blur. Jake filled the cabin with noise, stories of Portland bars and coworkers I barely knew. Tom stayed quiet, watching us both, his presence a steady anchor. I tried to act normal, to match Jake's energy, but every time Tom's eyes met mine, I felt the pull again, stronger than before. That night, Jake insisted on a bonfire. We dragged chairs outside, the flames casting shadows across the clearing. Jake cracked open beers, passing them around, his laughter loud against the quiet night. Tom sat across from me, his face half lit by the fire, and I couldn't stop watching him. Every glance felt like a secret, a risk I wasn't sure I could take. "You okay, Ethan?" Jake asked, nudging me. You're zoning out. Yeah, just tired, I said, forcing a smile. But I wasn't tired. I was alive. More than I'd been in years. And it was because of the man across the fire. The one I couldn't stop thinking about. As Jake rambled on, Tom stood, brushing off his jeans. I'm turning in, he said, his voice low. You boys have fun. He looked at me as he said it, and my heart stuttered. I wanted to follow him, to ask what this was, what we were, but I stayed put, the weight of Jake's presence keeping me anchored. Later, as I lay on the couch, Jake snoring in the next room, I stared at the ceiling, Tom's words echoing in my head. Be me. I didn't know how, but for the first time, I wanted to try, and I wanted to try with him. Jake's presence changed everything. The cabin, once a quiet haven, was now filled with his energy, loud, chaotic, oblivious. He blasted music from a portable speaker, planned hikes, and talked nonstop about work, women, and weekend plans. I nodded along, but my mind was elsewhere, tethered to Tom, who seemed to retreat further with every hour. I caught glimpses of him throughout the day, chopping wood, fixing a loose porch rail, always moving, always apart. His silence was a wall, and I didn't know how to breach it. Jake didn't notice, or if he did, he didn't care. He was too busy playing host, dragging me along on a hike to a ridge overlooking the valley. Come on, Ethan. Live a little, Jake said, tossing me a water bottle as we trekked uphill. His enthusiasm was infectious, but it felt hollow. I wanted the quiet of the cabin, the weight of Tom's gaze, the space to figure out what was happening inside me. At the ridge, Jake sprawled on a rock, grinning at the view. This is why I come here, he said. Clears your head, right? I nodded, but my head was anything but clear. I kept thinking about Tom's confession, his life, the courage it took to rebuild after losing so much. I envied it, that strength, and I hated how small it made me feel, still hiding, still afraid. You and my dad get along okay? Jake asked, out of nowhere. I froze, my heart racing. Yeah, I said, too quickly. He's cool. Jake laughed. Cool. Man, you're generous. He's a grumpy old bastard sometimes, but he's solid. Been through a lot. I wanted to ask what he meant, to dig into Tom's story, but Jake was already moving on, talking about some bar in Portland. I tuned him out, my eyes on the horizon, wondering how to bridge the gap between me and the man back at the cabin. When we returned, Tom was on the porch, reading a book, his glasses perched on his nose. He looked up as we approached, and for a moment, our eyes locked. My stomach flipped, and I looked away, afraid Jake would notice. Dinner's on me tonight, Jake announced, bounding inside. You guys chill. Tom set his book down, his gaze lingering on me. Good hike? He asked. Yeah, I said, sitting on the porch steps. Jake's, a lot. He chuckled. Always has been. We sat in silence, the kind that felt like it could hold entire conversations. I wanted to tell him everything about Ohio, about the boy I'd loved and lost, about the fear that still choked me. But Jake's voice from inside broke the spell, calling us for dinner. Dinner was loud, Jake dominating the conversation with stories that made Tom roll his eyes. I laughed when I was supposed to, but my focus was on Tom, the way he cut his steak, the way his fingers curled around his beer, the way he glanced at me when Jake wasn't looking. Every moment felt stolen, precious, dangerous. After dinner, Jake suggested cards, but Tom declined, saying he had to fix a leak in the roof. I offered to help, desperate for a moment alone with him. Jake shrugged, already shuffling the deck, and I followed Tom to the shed for tools. The air was cool, the stars sharp above us. Tom handed me a flashlight, his fingers lingering on mine. "You don't have to do this," he said. "I want to," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos in my chest. We climbed to the roof, the world reduced to the beam of my flashlight and the sound of Tom's steady breathing. He worked with precision, patching the leak, and I held the light, feeling useless but unwilling to leave. When he finished, he sat back, wiping sweat from his brow. "You're good at this," I said, gesturing to the roof. "Been doing it a long time," he said. "Fixing things. Breaking things too. Sometimes." I swallowed, sensing the weight behind his words. "Like what?" He looked at me, his eyes dark in the moonlight. "My marriage. My life. Took me years to figure out who I was. And by then, I'd hurt people I loved." I wanted to tell him I understood, that I was breaking things to myself, mostly, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I said, "You seem like you've got it figured out now." He laughed, a bitter sound. "Not even close. But I'm trying." We sat there, the night wrapping around us, and for the first time, I felt brave enough to speak. "I'm gay," I said, the words tumbling out. "I've never told anyone that. Not like this." Tom's eyes softened, and he reached out, his hand resting on my shoulder. "Thank you for telling me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That's a big thing." I nodded, my throat tight. His hand stayed there, warm and steady, and I didn't want him to move. For the first time, I felt seen, not as the quiet guy from work, not as the kid who ran from Ohio, but as me. We didn't speak after that, just sat under the stars, the silence saying more than words ever could. I didn't know what this was, but I knew I didn't want it to end. The next morning, the cabin felt different, like the air itself was holding its breath. My confession on the roof had cracked something open in me, and Tom's quiet acceptance had sealed it. I wasn't sure what came next, but I knew I couldn't go back to the person I was before this weekend. Jake was up early, blasting music and making breakfast, oblivious to the shift. Tom was quieter than usual, his eyes catching mine over coffee, a silent acknowledgement of what we'd shared. I wanted to talk to him, to ask what it meant, but Jake's presence was a constant barrier. "Let's hit the lake today," Jake said, flipping bacon in a pan. "Get some fishing in. Maybe swim if it's warm enough." I nodded, but my heart wasn't in it. I wanted time with Tom, alone, to figure out this thing between us. But Jake was relentless, dragging us out to the lake with fishing rods and a cooler of beer. The lake was as beautiful as before, its surface a mirror for the sky. Jake set up his rod, chattering about work, while Tom and I sat on the shore, our silence a stark contrast. I could feel the weight of his presence, the memory of his hand on my shoulder, the warmth of his voice. "You fish?" Tom asked, breaking the silence. "Not really," I said. "Tried it once as a kid. Caught nothing but a bad sunburn." He chuckled. "It's not about catching anything. It's about sitting still long enough to think." I glanced at him, wondering if he meant more than he was saying. "What do you think about out here?" He looked at the water, his expression distant. "Everything. The past. The future. What I want now." My heart raced. "And what's that?" He turned to me, his eyes steady. "Something real." Before I could respond, Jake called out, waving a fish he'd caught. "Check this out, Ethan. Dinner tonight." I forced a laugh, but my mind was on Tom, on the words he'd left hanging. Something real. I wanted that too, more than I'd ever admitted to myself. The day dragged on, Jake's energy filling every moment. Tom stayed close but distant, like he was holding himself back. I caught him watching me, his eyes full of something I couldn't name. Want, maybe, or fear. It mirrored my own, and it was driving me crazy. That night, Jake suggested another bonfire, but a storm rolled in, rain hammering the cabin. We stayed inside, playing cards, the tension between me and Tom growing with every glance. Jake was oblivious, laughing and dealing cards, but I could barely focus. When Jake stepped outside to take a call, Tom and I were alone again. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes on me. "You okay?" he asked. "No," I said, the honesty surprising me. "I don't know what I'm doing here." He nodded, like he'd expected that. "You're figuring it out. That's enough for now." I wanted to tell him it wasn't enough, that I wanted more him. This feeling, a life where I wasn't afraid. But Jake burst back in, shaking rain from his hair, and the moment was gone. Later, as I lay on the couch, the storm raging outside, I couldn't stop thinking about Tom, about the way he made me feel brave, seen, alive. I didn't know how to name this thing between us, but I knew it was real, and that scared me more than anything. In the middle of the night, unable to sleep, I got up and found Tom in the kitchen, staring out the window at the rain. He turned as I approached, his expression soft but guarded. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "No," I said. "You?" He shook his head. "Storms keeping me up. And other things." I stepped closer, my heart pounding. "Like what?" He looked at me, his eyes searching mine. "You, Ethan. You're making it hard to think straight." My breath caught. I wanted to close the distance, to touch him, to say the things I was too scared to say. But Jake was in the next room, and the weight of that reality held me back. Instead, I said, "I'm glad I'm here." He smiled, a small, sad thing. "Me too." We stood there, the rain a steady drumbeat, and I knew we were on the edge of something. I just didn't know if I was brave enough to jump. The storm didn't let up, and neither did the tension. By morning, The rain had softened to a drizzle, but the air inside the cabin was thick with unspoken words. Jake was up early, planning another hike, but I could barely focus on his chatter. My mind was on Tom, on the way he'd looked at me last night, on the pull that was growing harder to ignore. "Let's skip the hike," Tom said suddenly, cutting through Jake's plans. "Roads are muddy. Better to stay put." Jake groaned but didn't argue, settling for a day of board games instead. I was relieved, not because of the mud, but because it meant more time with Tom, even if Jake was there. We played Monopoly, Jake's competitive streak turning the game into a war. Tom was quieter, his moves deliberate, his eyes catching mine over the board. Every glance felt like a conversation, a question I wasn't sure how to answer. By afternoon, Jake was restless, pacing the cabin. "I'm gonna check the shed," he said. "Make sure the storm didn't mess anything up." As soon as he was out the door, the silence was electric. Tom and I sat at the table, the game forgotten. He leaned forward, his voice low. "You've been quiet all day." "So have you," I shot back, my heart racing. He smiled, a flicker of something vulnerable in his eyes. "Fair enough. But I'm not the one who looks like he's carrying the world." I swallowed hard. "I told you I'm gay. That's a lot for me." "I know," he said, his voice soft. "And I'm proud of you for saying it." The words hit me harder than I expected. No one had ever said they were proud of me. Not for this. I looked at him, really looked, and saw the man behind the strength, the one who'd lost everything to be true to himself. "I don't know how to do this," I admitted. "Be out. Be me." He reached across the table, his hand covering mine. "You don't have to have it all figured out. Just take it one step at a time." His touch was warm, grounding, and I didn't pull away. For a moment, it was just us, the cabin fading into the background. Then the door slammed open, Jake stomping in, and Tom's hand retreated. "Shed's fine," Jake said, oblivious. "You guys done with the game?" I nodded, my heart still pounding from Tom's touch. The rest of the day was a blur. Jake's presence a constant reminder of the line we couldn't cross. But every time Tom looked at me, I felt its possibility, the want, the fear. That night, Jake passed out early, exhausted from the day. I found Tom on the porch, staring at the stars. I joined him, the air cool against my skin. "You're leaving tomorrow," he said, not looking at me. "Yeah," I said, my chest tight. "Work?" He nodded, his jaw tight. "This place is gonna feel empty without you." I turned to him, my heart in my throat. "Tom, I don't," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Not yet. You're still figuring things out. I don't want to push you." I wanted to argue, to tell him I was sure, that I wanted him. But he was right. I was still scared, still running. But for the first time, I wanted to stop. We stood there, the stars above us, and I felt the weight of what we could be. It was terrifying, exhilarating, and I knew I couldn't leave without knowing. "Tom," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "I don't want to run anymore." He turned to me, his eyes searching mine. Then, slowly, he reached out, his hand cupping my face. "Then don't," he said, and before I could think, he kissed me. It was soft, tentative, but it set my world on fire. For the first time, I wasn't hiding. I was here, with him, and it felt like everything. The kiss lingered, a quiet revolution in the dark. Tom pulled back, his eyes searching mine, and I saw the same fear and hope I felt. We didn't speak, just stood there, the night wrapping us in its silence. "We can't," he said finally, his voice rough. "Not here. Not with Jake." I nodded, my throat tight. He was right, but it didn't make it hurt less. The cabin, Jake, the world outside it all felt like a wall between us. But that kiss had changed everything, and I wasn't going back. Morning came too fast. Jake was up, packing his truck, oblivious to the shift in the air. I helped load the cooler, my eyes stealing glances at Tom, who was quieter than ever. When it was time to go, he walked me to my car, his hands in his pockets. "Drive safe," he said, his voice steady but heavy. "I will," I said, wanting to say so much more. "Tom, He shook his head, a small smile on his lips. "Find me when you're ready, Ethan. I'll be here." I nodded, my chest aching. As I drove away, the cabin shrinking in my rearview mirror, I felt like I was leaving a piece of myself behind. But I also felt something new, hope. Maybe. Or courage. Back in Portland, life tried to pull me back into its rhythm. Work, coffee, late nights alone. But I wasn't the same. Tom's words, his touch, his truth cracked me open. I started small, telling a coworker I was gay, then a friend. Each time, it got easier, like shedding a skin I'd outgrown. Weeks later, I found myself at a bar, the kind I'd always avoided, where men like me didn't have to hide. I saw Tom across the room, his flannel shirt familiar, his eyes lighting up when he saw me. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing, and when he kissed me again, it wasn't tentative. It was sure, real, ours. We didn't rush. We took it one step at a time. Like he'd said, dates in quiet diners, hikes in the rain, nights in his apartment where the world felt far away. Jake found out, eventually, and after the shock, he was okay, better than okay. He saw his dad happy, saw me happy, and that was enough. Tom taught me what it meant to live truthfully, to love without fear. I wasn't running anymore. Not from him. Not from myself. The cabin had been the start. But the life we built together was the destination. And it was worth every moment of fear, every step toward truth. In the end, it wasn't just about love. It was about finding the courage to be seen, to be real, to be me. And with Tom by my side, I finally was.